Hello, I'm Aziz Haniffa, and today we are on the trail with successful entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, entrepreneur turned politician turned Republican presidential candidate, who is running for the GOP primary nomination with the likes of former President Donald Trump, Vice President Pence, and a whole slew of sitting senators, congressmen, and also former governors. I've been a political junkie, and I've been following you right from the start. You appeared on Gutfeld, Tucker Carlson, etc. You've burst into the political scene with a bang. You know, instead of using the traditional process of the Bobby Jindals and the NikkiHaleys, who were legislators, first state legislators, congressmen, then governorships, etc. What makes you apart from them, and what triggered your jumping into the fray? I know you were flirting a bit with when Senator Bob Portman, there were people pushing you to run for the Senate, but getting into the big leagues and running for the presidency, what triggered you? Was it your book tour, which was very well received, your two books, etc.? Then, of course, you announced on Tucker Carlson, and that's where you announced your presidency. Did Tucker Carlson push you to it? What really triggered your wanting to jump into the fray and into the big leagues?
Well, the reality is that I think we need an outsider in the White House. I've lived the full American dream. I think we need fewer professional politicians in Washington, D.C., and more people who have actually had true success in the private sector. I've built multi-billion-dollar companies from scratch. I've built multiple successful companies. I've written 3 successful books. I believe my success in the private sector, as a parent, as the father of now 2 young sons, as a millennial, I'm the first millennial ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. For me, I don't believe in some hierarchy. I believe in looking myself in the mirror and asking myself, how can I have the biggest possible impact that's positive on this country? And for me, that answer was to lead us out of this national identity crisis that we're in, to give pride to the next generation of Americans, to my 2 sons and their generation. And I saw no better way to do that than to lead this country as our next president. And I think being an outsider is actually an advantage to accomplishing that.
One columnist wrote that you are a vegetarian who throws red meat to the Republican base. Are you a mega Republican?
I am an unapologetic America first, pro-American conservative. What does that mean? I think that as the leader of this country, yes, I will put the interests of Americans first without apologizing for it. That's what the leader of this nation should do. If you're the leader of Japan or Poland or India, for that matter, this is what makes Modi a good leader of his country. You should do that when you lead your country. But the trap we've fallen into in the United States is by thinking that if you're the U.S. president, somehow it's your job to look after everyone else's interests and apologize for your own at home. I reject that. I think the job of the next president is to put America first. And I do that in a way that I think will unite this country, but I won't apologize for it.
Why have you become such a culture warrior? When you could have spoken about your successful entrepreneurship, taking on the entrenched pharmaceuticals industry, starting a hedge fund and going after the likes of a Woke, as you allege, BlackRock, Vanguard, etc. Why is it that you've become such a strong cultural warrior instead of focusing on what you really made yourself into, this successful entrepreneur?
That's a label that the media attaches to me. Yeah. And I think the media is badly broken. Today, the media thrives on polarization. What I'm talking about is actually a unifying vision for this country. I stand for meritocracy. I stand for unapologetically the idea that no matter who you are or where you came from or what your skin color is, that you should be able to get ahead in America based on your own hard work and commitment and dedication. I call that pro-merit. Somebody else will call that a culture warrior. The labels don't matter. I'm clear about what I stand for. I stand for the truth. I stand for the principles that this country was founded on. To me, that's not a cultural warrior. I think that that's a pro-American leader. And I believe that that's quietly putting the media to one side and the labels they attach. I think that's what most Americans are actually hungry for. And that's what I'm delivering.
Some have argued that while you've taken some zingers at many of the presidential candidates like DeSantis, NikkiHaley, you've scrupulously stayed away from saying a single critical thing against former President Donald Trump, who's leading very handily in the polls. You've not only echoed some of his talking points about two-tier justice system, etc., but also called on all GOP candidates to take a pledge that if one of them is elected president, that they should pardon Donald Trump. You've also called for the Espionage Act to be eliminated. Why is that? Some critics argue that, quote unquote, that you're sucking up to Trump because you're hoping for a cabinet position at some point. How do you counter that type of contention?
Well, I can tell you flat out that I'm not going to take a cabinet position or any second best position. I'm running to lead this nation. I know that many people are sensitive when you draw policy contrasts from them. And so many of those other campaigns have been perpetuating that narrative. Frankly, I've drawn more policy contrasts from Trump than probably most other candidates in this race. But I draw policy contrasts from the others as well. I think debate makes the Republican Party stronger. I think it makes our country stronger. I look forward to facing off with the other candidates on the debate stage, which I've qualified for in late August.
Yeah.
And I'm running to lead this country as our next president, as somebody who actually can reach that next generation of Americans and revive national pride. And I think I can do that with due respect better than anybody else in this race.
Yeah. I'm sure you are aware of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's state visit to the U.S. last month, where President Biden rolled out the red carpet and then some, and also he addressed a joint session of Congress on the invitation of Speaker McCarthy. How bullish are you about the U.S.-India relationship, and how much do you attribute this relationship to the catalytic role played by the Indian-American community, who are punching way, way above their weight in all facets of American society?
I was actually in person present at the joint address to Congress. I was invited as a guest of the congressman who hosted me earlier that day. Yeah. And I'll tell you this. I think it's a natural alliance between the world's two largest democracies, but also at an important time in our history as Americans. The top threat that we face is communist China. It is not the old Cold War. The USSR does not exist. Yeah. It is communist China today. So I think the reliance on India and Japan and South Korea, but yes, India absolutely on that list, both economically and geopolitically, is going to be crucial for the U.S. to actually be able to declare independence from China. I think that's also important from India's standpoint. So there's a natural alliance here. I'm glad to see Modi's visit here was successful. And under my presidency, India will absolutely be on the list of core allies for the United States to prioritize.
As if you are elected president, how differently would you nurture this U.S.-India partnership, this burgeoning relationship, which seems to be almost on autopilot from the bad old days of the Cold War, during the time India was considered a surrogate of the erstwhile Soviet Union?
Exactly. So the first thing is a lot of my foreign policy wakes us up from the fact that we're not in the 20th century anymore. Yeah. And many in both the Republican and Democratic Party, be it with the Ukraine war or otherwise, are driving with their eyes in the rearview mirror. My view is if we're looking forward to the 21st century, most of which is still ahead of us, we have to have both sides of this relationship leveling up. I think the U.S. can level up by saying that we're going to prioritize trade relationships with partners like India, that we're going to need as trade partners to be able to reduce our economic reliance on China. For India's part, I think India needs to level up on its investment in its own military. The U.S. has tried to be helpful on that front. In the past, India has fallen short of its commitments. I'd like to see India level up. So in any partnership, I think good friends push each other to be the best version of themselves. That's what I want to see out of this partnership between the U.S. and India. But I predict it will be strong in the decade ahead and certainly under my presidency.
So you are perfectly in sync with sort of a bipartisan policy as the U.S. sees India as a counterweight to a very aggressive China. You're totally in sync with that. Do you see anything that the Biden administration, or maybe if you're elected, what would you do differently in countering an aggressive China? Because India has this policy of strategic autonomy. They don't want to be seen as an ally, but they are part of the Quad with Japan, Australia, and South Korea in terms of pushing this Indo-Pacific, the entire pathway where China is trying to have dominance. So you're in sync with being a counterweight to China.
I'm not only in sync with it, I've been leading the way on that message. Yeah. In fact, one of the things that I want to see is I do want to see India be express about the fact that, yes, India views itself as an ally of the United States in this bipolar world order vis-a-vis China and the U.S. India needs to be clear it stands with the U.S. And I think it'll be in the advantage of both the United States and India to see that. In the case of Taiwan, even if China invades Taiwan, My top job as U.S. president is to make sure that China does not invade Taiwan, to deter that, but without going to war over it. So the relationship with India is crucial because many of the oil supplies from the Middle East flow through the Indian Ocean all the way to China. If China knows and Xi Jinping knows that India stands solidly with the U.S. on this, that will force Xi Jinping to have to think twice before he invades Taiwan. That's important for economic security around the world. Global semiconductors, the supply chain, originates on that tiny island nation. That would hurt both India and the U.S. if he were to invade Taiwan. I think India standing solidly with the U.S. and China knowing that, I think will be good both for India and the United States.
Have you met with Prime Minister Modi during your visits to India or during almost his 6 visits to the U.S.?
He and I have not met yet. No,
Yeah.
I think that I expect to spend time with him after I'm elected, perhaps in the lead up to the election. We're meeting with other serious world leaders as well. But I think that most important is going to be actually honesty and transparency in that relationship. Not just the feel-good statements. Let's get to the knit and grit of how we can actually solidify that relationship beyond the platitudes.
Talking about honesty and being candid, what's your assessment of Prime Minister Modi? Do you see him as a unifier or as a polarizer? You know, there have been a lot of minorities and others who have been very concerned, human rights groups, very concerned about what's happening in India vis-a-vis the minorities. And just on the eve of his meeting, former President Obama had this statement saying that President Biden should bring up these issues about minorities, etc. And he doesn't want a rupture in the democratic fabric of India. So what's your assessment of Prime Minister Modi?
I think he's been an excellent prime minister for India. I think he has unapologetically embraced free market capitalism. It's the best system known to man to lift people up from poverty. We know that from our experience here in the United States. Modi's been building on that experience in India, lifting people up from poverty, regardless of their background, regardless of identity politics. India has prospered economically. GDP growth is up. I think that's the ultimate metric of a truly successful unifying leader. Economic growth and prosperity is something that unites people of any nation. India is not an exception to that. So I think Modi has been an unapologetic success. I also think that in rooting out some of the financial failures, corruption and otherwise, we have to applaud his accomplishments. No leader is perfect, but I do think that he's been an outstanding leader of India. I think what we need in the United States and what we can learn from that experience is Modi is a leader that does not apologize for Indian national identity. What we need in the United States is a U.S. president who stands proudly for American national identity. The current president in the White House, I do not think, meets that standard. I'm running to lead America forward to rediscover what it means to be a citizen of the United States. Modi's done a great job of that in India, but now it's time for someone to rise to the occasion here in the U.S. and answer what it means to be an American.